Welcome to Chapter 11, Scene Size Up. This is for the Emergency Care 14th edition for the EMT. So we are going to talk about Scene Size Up. So there are some elements in Scene Size Up that we need to take into consideration. So checking for scene safety, taking standard precautions or BSI or PPE or whatever you want to call it. Noting the mechanism of injury or the nature of the patient's illness, determining the number of patients, and deciding what additional resources may be necessary. So in scene safety, the only thing predictable about emergencies is that they are often unpredictable and can pose many dangers. After you've been in EMS or anything for a while, you know that you can't really predict anything that you walk into. There's just no way to predict that. So as you near a collision scene, look and listen for other emergency units approaching. Look for signs of a collision-related power outage. Observe traffic flow. Look for smoke in the direction of the collision scene. When you're within sight of a scene, look for clues indicating escaped hazard materials. Look for collision victims on or near the road. Look for smoke not seen at a distance, and look for any kind of broken utility poles and down wires. We have a lot of rubberneckers, a lot of people who have good intentions to want to help, and they are going to be walking on the side of the road. Not only normal citizens, but also fire, police. Those people are also going to be walking on the road. And then, of course, just watch for signals of police officers and other emergency service personnel. As you reach the scene, you're going to follow the instructions of the person in charge. Don appropriate protective apparel. It can include head protection, bunker coat, and an ANSI-approved reflective vest over your coat. So the two things that we have on our trucks at Mercy are the head protection. We have a helmet, and then we have the reflective vest. And those are pretty much standard for anything. There are some ambulance services, obviously, like Lake West, who have bunker gear. Or no, I'm sorry, not Lake West, but Lake Ozark. They have bunker gear because they are a fire department based EMS system. And then sniff for any kind of odors that may indicate a hazmat release. The danger zone. So when we establish a danger zone, depending on what kind of thing it is, what kind of hazard there is, you want at least 50 feet in all directions if there are no apparent hazards. This danger zone should be limited to personnel who are working the scene. And then when there's fuel spilled, you want 100 feet in all directions. Of course, if you take a hazmat class, those numbers go up depending on the hazardous material it is. Vehicle on fire is 100 feet. Wires down. That should be one full span of the wires away from the pole to which the broken wires are attached. Good rule of thumb is one pole length away. And then hazard materials. Just check your E for any kind of hazard materials, and we'll talk about that at the end of class. The ERG. So, crime scenes and acts of violence. We're going to evaluate for the threat of violence, so fighting, loud noises, weapons visible or in use, signs of alcohol or other drug use, unusual silence, and any kind of knowledge of prior violence. You don't know that you don't always know that you're going to walk into some type of violence or violent scene. because I mean it could turn violent pretty quickly, um, or unsafe. So standard precautions, again, BSI or PPE, gloves, mask, uh, eyewear, whatever you want to wear. Okay, gown if you need to. So, nature of the call. So this is what we kind of determine the mechanism of injury or the nature of illness. So the mechanism of injury is um, how the patient got injured, and we can kind of, based on that injury and what we've seen in the past, and the injury pattern, we can kind of see what potential injuries that patient could have. So like a rollover, they're probably going to have side all over injury. If it's a side impact, they're probably going to have injury to the side that they were impacted on. If it's a head-on collision, they could have up and over the dash. We'll talk about that here in just a minute, but they could have up and over injuries. They could have down and under injuries where they go either up and over the dash or down and under the dash. Just based on the mechanism of injury, we can kind of tell what injuries that patient should have or potentially has. Nature of illness, this is what, like a medical call, okay? So we're going to look at what's wrong with the patient, okay? What's their chief complaint? What does that lead us into farther on down the road when we start taking a history? So mechanism of injury. So this is the forces that may have caused the injury. Understanding those forces can predict injury patterns. It can be very useful in predicting injuries associated with certain types of motor vehicle crashes. So head-on collisions, you can either have an up and over injury pattern or a down and under injury pattern. If you have an up and over, that patient could have a head injury, chest injuries from the steering wheel, various other injuries. If they have a down and under, they're probably more likely going to have lower extremity injuries. Tib-fib fractures, femur fractures, pendant legs, various things like that. Rear end collisions, they're going to have whiplash. They could have various other kind of injuries to the back. They could also have injuries to the chest. Side impact, again, whatever side they've been impacted on. If it's a driver and they got impacted on the passenger side, most likely they're not going to have a whole lot of injuries. They may have some on the left side, but if we go through the kinetic forces that dictate the world, basically, Newton's first law is a thing in motion stays in motion until acted upon by another thing. So you've got a couple different injuries or a couple different impacts. So you've got the impact to the car itself, and then you've got the impact to the person, and then the impact from that person to the car, or organs, because everything is traveling at that one speed, and then it's acted upon, and it immediately stops, and so let's just say a front-end collision. So front-end collision, you're traveling 60 miles an hour, you hit something, it immediately stops. Your body is still traveling at 60 miles an hour because it has not stopped yet. So once it hits the steering wheel, your body stops, and then your organs are still traveling at that 60 miles an hour too. So they hit uh, the inner lining of your body. Yes. Rotational impact collisions. These are when the cars are struck and then spin. The initial impact often causes subsequent impacts as well. Falls. So you've got different types of falls. So significant falls are considered for an adult anything more than 20 feet. And children under the 15 years of age is anything more than 10 feet or 2 to 3 times the height of the child would be a significant fall. So important factors about falls is that the height from which the patient fell, the surface that the patient fell onto, part of the patient that hit the surface, and anything that interrupted the fall. Did they hit anything on the way down? Did they land on concrete? Did they land on dirt? Did they land on grass? Did they land on a pile of pillows? All of those things is important to that fall. Penetrating trauma. So this is injury caused by an object that passes through the skin or other body tissues. It's classified by the velocity of the item that caused the injury. So low velocity injuries include knives. Damage is limited typically to the area penetrated and may be multiple wounds. Medium velocity and high velocity injuries may be anywhere in the body and damage directly from the projectile and the pressure related damage or cavitation. So if you can imagine a bullet going through for the deer hunters or the hunters in the class, if you look at the path of that bullet and the way it goes through the body, you're not just going to have one single path straight through and through. It's going to be, there's going to be like little offshoots from that one path. Did that bullet take that path? No, but the pressure from the bullet entering the body has now created these little offshoots and paths off of the main path of the projectile. And that's called cavitation. Okay. Blunt force trauma. So this is injury caused by a blow that strikes the body. It does not necessarily penetrate the skin or other body tissues. Signs are often subtle and easily overlooked. We want to maintain that index of suspicion based on mechanism of injury. So nature of illness. This is the reason the patient called the EMS. Okay. We want to begin identifying the nature of illness during the scene size up. And you must scan the entire scene. Okay. Not only for situational awareness, but for clues to what is going on with that patient. If you've got an unconscious patient, you need to scan the scene and see if you can figure out if there's drugs related, alcohol related, maybe syringes from insulin, or the patient takes medicine, or they took an overdose or something like that. You've got to figure out, kind of do an investigation as to figure out why that patient is sick. Information may be attained from many sources, so the patient is probably your best, sometimes your best patient historian. Family members or bystanders, sometimes the family members know more than the patient does. And they know more about the patient's history, about the patient's problems, and they'll be able to tell you better. I had a lady who, every time her husband went to the doctor, she had a calendar, a wall calendar, and she would write down, like almost verbatim, what that doctor said at that appointment, or when the patient went to the hospital, she would write down everything that doctor said and told her while her husband was in the hospital. I mean, it was almost phenomenal, almost like looking at a patient care chart from the hospital. So Number of patients and adequacy of resources. So you want to know how many patients are there. Do we have sufficient resources on hand to care for all the patients? And you want to know that early on, so that way you can call for those resources and get them. You can always cancel resources, but if you haven't called for them and need them, then you're almost screwed. Okay. You want to try to anticipate the maximum number of patients and radio for help accordingly.